This week is the week to really restart, to really recharge. Let an old part of yourself die and let a new part of yourself begin. Welcome back to the Astrology Report. My name is Cam White. This time it is for November 13th through November 19th of 2023. We're almost done with the year. And as we get to the beginning of next year, you might be wanting to start something new or start a new diet or a new workout or start a new business, whatever that is. I think a lot of that starts this week. A lot of that, preparation or that mentality or getting the momentum to go into the new year in a very successful way, I believe starts this week, because this week is extremely powerful in a way that's not always like, a walk in the park or, roses and daisies. It's a very extreme feeling and a very extreme reset, but this is a good one. So let's go ahead and talk about it. So we're starting Monday off with the new moon in Scorpio, which will be pretty much conjoining Mars, as well as the sun will go opposite Uranus on Monday. Now, the big thing with this is this new moon technically isn't opposite Uranus. If it's like opposite Uranus, I want it to be like on the degree, like the same exact degree. It's 1 degree off, but the sun will still go opposite Uranus. So if you want to say that this new moon is opposite Uranus, you're more than welcome to, but I'm just being a little bit technical here. But it's new moon Monday. Love the fact that there's a new moon on a Monday. If you wanted to, again, restart things, change things up. Monday's always a good day. I mean, today's always a good day, but this is the new moon in Scorpio. As we've had Mars in Scorpio here. Mars is, again, fights, conflicts, our energy, our drive, and our ambition. It's in Scorpio where it wants to sink its teeth deep into something. It wants to be fixated on a specific target. It has like tunnel vision on a specific goal. Mars in Scorpio can be like all encompassing, like this, overwhelming feeling of like, both anger and resentment, but also pain and suffering. But pain and suffering are good. As much as we want to avoid them, as much as we don't want to experience them, it's the lows that let us experience the highs. And while Mars has been through Scorpio, it's under a process called combustion. What combustion is when a planet is within 10 degrees from the sun. And when a planet is combust, what that theoretically means is when a planet is quote unquote sick or dying. And then once that planet conjoins the sun and comes out on the other side, it is reborn. But we're not there yet. But what I do find interesting is that as Mars is really, really combust at this point, just a few degrees away, we get a new moon right on top of it. So this is the new moon in Scorpio. If the moon, again, we've talked a lot about the moon not liking Scorpio. The moon is technically in its sign of fall in Scorpio. The moon is exalted in Taurus. It prefers to be at 3 degrees Taurus more than any other part in the chart. Yes, that even means it likes Taurus more than Cancer. But Scorpio is the exact opposite of Taurus. It's like worse than its, sign of detriment. It's a sign of fall where it just doesn't handle things well. When you are emotionally distraught, when you are emotionally reactionary, and you are toiling in pain and suffering, and you want to act revenge, or you don't want to let go of those negative emotions, like that does not help you. That can create more harm in your life and to other people's lives. But this new moon is allowing us to look at the part of Scorpio, or the part of our chart that Scorpio rules over, and it's getting us into an emotional state where we can reset that. Now, this whole week with the Mars Cazimi is resetting this part of our charts. Again, whatever Scorpio rules for you, both Aries and Scorpio, okay? Because those are both Mars' sign. That's this whole week. But this new moon is allowing ourselves to go under the emotional resetting to allow ourselves to do that. It's like you can't just start something new out of a whim. Like sometimes you have to be in the right state to undergo something. For example, if you want to go watch a scary movie, sometimes you have to mentally prepare yourself of like, okay, this is what I'm going to see. Like, I kind of have to, be prepared and have a boundary, or, just kind of get yourself in a preparation. And that's how I look at this new moon in Scorpio. It's preparing for the Mars Cazimi, but what does that mean? I think a lot of it is like letting yourself feel negative shit. I've talked a lot about this, I think, since Mars has entered Scorpio, but there's a lot of like, hey, do you want to feel this pain? Do you want to feel this suffering? What do you need to kill? What do you need to let go of? What do you need to surrender to and restart with in order to create more of that drive and that ambition? I think a lot of Scorpio is like, I can't think of a specific example, but in movies where the main character is, super close to death and he wants to give up. And then all of a sudden he finds it in him to just like completely come out of the ground and, keep fighting and then eventually like wins the battle. That's how I look at this. But this new moon in Scorpio is that like moment when you are at your last leg, like when you are at the absolute bottom and you don't know if you can get back up again. But it's one of those things of tapping into your feelings, tapping into your emotions, tapping into, again, the pain, the fear, and allowing that for one to die over this week. But Monday's just a time to tap into that. Like, let's get real. Like, it's really easy to say like, oh, for example, you've got a shitty situation in your life, but hey, you've got a job, you've got to, take care of, responsibilities, pay your bills. So there's times in your life where you just don't think about it because you have to, like you have to literally detach yourself away from it so you can get other things done. And then as time goes on, you avoid it more and more and more. And then it becomes normalized where you don't even realize that you're still in this shitty situation. This new moon is an opportunity to be like, yeah, I'm in this shitty situation and this sucks. I don't like this. What do I need to absolutely change? Like what, again, pain, resentment, unresolved feelings, especially in Scorpio, it's like these deep down, like gross, tar-like emotions. And the new moon is allowing you to tap into that and say, what needs to change here? Now, in a typical new moon, that's kind of the vibe. But what's different about this is Mars is there and Mars is like super duper combust and we're getting ready for a Mars Cazimi. This whole week is again about this change, but this new moon on Monday is about tapping into that feeling and being like, I don't want to deal with this any longer. I hate the way that this feels, and sitting in that and allowing that to stir up enough energy for you to make a massive change. Also on Monday, the sun will go opposite Uranus. There is an opportunity for breakthrough here. Sun in Scorpio, it's like sometimes when you get really, really deep into something, and especially, again, we're talking about sun, we're talking about your like vitality and your willpower, like very masculine, yang, like external, is that the one I'm looking for? Energy. There's a deepness, there is an extreme to that energy, and as it goes opposite Uranus, this is kind of like, oh, things just snap all of a sudden. Things just change all of a sudden. Also on Monday, after we have this new moon, for one, the moon will conjoin Mars. So this is the time to like set that intention or at least feel that and then start to slowly move away from it, slowly cut away from it. Like I think of like, what was that movie Saw where the guy had to cut his own leg off in order to get out of the restrictions? That's almost how I see this week is like, you might have to sit there. What's really interesting? Given all of, I got done talking with Gordon White on his podcast. We've talked about the apocalypse and stuff like that. And so for that, I've just been getting into a lot of things that maybe I wouldn't normally get into. And one of them, like I've been recently interested in is like Civil War, like medicine. And I think a lot about like amputation and just how extreme it is. But that's how I kind of look at this moon conjoining Mars. It's like, you're not just going to be a clean break. Like you might have to slowly and painfully cut that old part of yourself off. Again, maybe Scorpio rules your 7th house and it's about relationships. Maybe, maybe it's in your 8th house and it's about debt. Maybe it's time to get out of that debt and pay the price to get out of that. Maybe it's in your 10th house and you need to have a restart in your career and your reputation, your legacy. But the moon conjoining Mars is like that, just cutting a bone off, and just it's slow and it's agonizing, but like you have to get out of the trap. After that, the moon will then ingress into Sagittarius and square Saturn. There's parts of this I like and there's parts of it that I don't. The moon conjoining Sagittarius, or the moon going into Sagittarius. Sweet, I'm free. I'm no longer bonded by these chains. But then it's square Saturn. It's like, fuck, I don't have a leg. I don't have a foot anymore. How am I supposed to walk? That's how I look at this. Like the moon going into Sagittarius is the sense of freedom, the sense of optimism. But as it's square Saturn, it's like, which is also really funny because Pisces rules the feet. So like just cutting off like your foot, you're like, fuck, I don't have a foot now. How am I supposed to walk? Do I have to hobble here? The moon going into Sagittarius again, optimism, freedom, excitement. But squaring Saturn is like, you ain't going anywhere right now. Like the real journey again is within. Who do you have to be? Again, it's one of those things where when you're in a extremely stressful environment, when you're in a situation that, is, very chaotic, like you have to be cool, calm, and collected. if you're going to be panicking and freaking out, like you're going to make the situation worse. And so I think with the moon and Sag squaring Saturn, there's a level of like, okay, I now have the freedom, but my leg's cut off, I'm bleeding out everywhere. I need to be cool and calm and collected in order to not bleed out to death, in order to still escape this area. And so Monday is just like, I know I'm using really extreme analogies here, but I mean, again, this is why you guys come here. Like, I'm not talking about the fluffy, life's great and, you're going to meet your twin flame tomorrow and shit like that, which is fine if people want to talk about that. But I find this a very excellent opportunity to really do some deep work. So then we get into Tuesday, and on Tuesday, the moon will then conjoin Mercury and it will sextile Venus. Tuesday is kind of a really weird vibe shift. The reason I say it that way is it's all Mercury-Venus stuff. Mercury's in Sag, Venus is in Libra. If you're on my Patreon and you watch the monthly live overview, as well as the monthly rising sign horoscopes that I do, the analogy I've been using for Mercury and Sag sextiling Venus and Libra, which also happens on Wednesday, is just the whole... there's like a meme where it's like online with like Gen Zers or millennials where it's like me and the bad bitch I pulled by being goofy or by being silly. That's how I think of Mercury and Sag sextiling Venus and Libra. It's like Mercury's communication, logic, rationale. It's in Sagittarius. It's in detriment. Like, you don't need to be like... Sagittarius rules clowns, by the way. In fact, the circus first started with a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Sagittarius. I think I learned about that last year, and I find that really interesting. But the moon conjoining Mercury in Sagittarius is like an expression of our emotions, but it's in Sagittarius. What are we hopeful for? What are we optimistic of? What are we just being little silly, goofy people about? But it also sextiles Venus, where it's like, for example, I look at this as like, you go to a party right after you cut your leg off and everyone's like, oh my God, are you okay? And you're like, whoa, I'm missing my leg. I didn't realize that. Like, you just play it off in a very fun, charming way. Like, Monday's very like, I'm extreme, and then Tuesday, like, be a little bit goofy about it to relieve the pressure, to relieve the, intensity. Not everything has to be intense. And I just look at Tuesday as like, there's kind of so much like lighter energy that it will probably feel a lot better than Monday. Although it's just kind of like, yeah, well, Monday still just happened. So like, we're still fresh from that. Like, the wound is still fresh. But as the moon conjoins Mercury, there is this, level of communicating with people on an emotional level, but it's in Sagittarius. What are we hopeful for? What are we dreaming of? What is our vision? Where do we want to go? But it's Mercury in Sag. Like, we don't really have a plan yet, or at least the plan to get there doesn't really make sense. Like, right now, we're just really riding off hopes and dreams. But the moon making a sextile to Venus in Libra is like the people that are around you, connecting with people, sharing that with people creates a level of inspiration. Like, the people that you're with or the relationships that you have are helping inspiring that. And so then we get to Wednesday, and that's when Mercury actually makes a sextile to Venus. I just think in general, this is such a flirt transit, like super, super flirty, super, super fun, lighthearted, easygoing. Like, Mercury and Sag is just kind of like, you can just say things without having to think of them. And yes, Mercury's in detriment. Like, Mercury will enter shadow here soon. So at a certain point, you'll have to like, cut that off. But, Mercury and Sag is just like, not be like just saying things even if they may not make sense. I always think of Mercury and Sag too as like when you pronounce a word incorrectly because you like read it from a book or you read it from a website and you've never heard anyone pronounce it. So like you end up pronouncing it incorrectly. But Mercury sextiling Venus is like, there is, again, a connection with a relationship here that is harmonious, that is valuable, that does bring a lot more peace, that does bring a lot more like sense of diplomacy. Like, Mercury in Sagittarius is just letting the boundaries go for like how you're supposed to say something or what needs to be said. And it's kind of like, well, you can kind of just be open here. It's kind of like, have you ever had like a friend, or I know I've talked a lot of shit on therapy before, and that's for the most part, like I still believe a lot of that shit. But I did have one really good therapist, and it was when I was like 16, 17. I think it was like 16. I was like really suicidal at the time, but it was my like county therapist. Like, I had to go to this therapist because the county ordered me to. And this county therapist was the sickest bitch I ever fucking met. She was like on my team for everything. She wasn't on my team for a lot of stuff because like at the time I had a lot of problems with my parents. Then she met my mom. She's like, oh, okay, like you're not wrong. Even though she thought I was like wrong because I'm just like some angry white 16-year-old boy who's like mad at his mom. But I felt in those moments with her, like I was just allowed to say anything. Like I can be open, I can be honest, even if I don't mean it, even if it may not be true. Like I just need to express how I feel. And with Mercury and Sagittarius, it's not so much expressing how you feel, but it's much more of like the boundaries of how you need to say something don't really matter. You just need to kind of blur it out. You just kind of need to say it. Mercury and Sagittarius is also really good for yapping all day long. Like Mercury sextiling Venus just sounds like, you just go to meet a friend for a drink at 7 p.m. and then before you know it, it's 2 a.m. because you guys have been talking all night long. That's how I look at that. But on Wednesday, the moon will also make a square to Neptune. Whereas the moon is in Sagittarius and we are more connected again to what is our vision? What is our plan? Where do we want to go in the future? What is fun? And we start talking about it. The moon makes that square to Neptune where, have you ever like had an idea or a plan or a vision? And the more that you talk about it, I know there's that saying like, oh, don't talk about like your plans and shit like that. We're just going to set that to the side. But have you ever like thought it through more and realized you're like, how do I actually do that? Is that even possible? Can I actually do that? That's how I think of the moon in Sagittarius squaring Neptune and Pisces, where you're kind of like, I didn't think of it that way. How is that going to actually work? So Wednesday's very fun. It's very lighthearted. I don't think it's the best day to make like super serious business plans that you're going to stick to, but like shoot out ideas. I think in TV they call it like a blue sky meeting, where it's kind of like in television. It's like, I can't remember where I heard this from. There was a specific TV show I heard this about, but it was like you pretty much just sit down and you all just say your ideas. There's nothing dumb. There's nothing that is wrong. You just shout out your ideas and we'll see what works. That's how I look at Mercury and Sag sextiling Venus and Libra. But as the moon squares Neptune, maybe some of your ideas aren't like as easily applicable, and maybe you have to think those through a little bit more, but it's more of an idea of just getting the ideas out there. And then we get to Thursday, and on Thursday, the moon is going to ingress into Capricorn. It's going to sextile Saturn. It will trine Jupiter and square Venus. Love the Thursday's moon transits. The reason being is the moon's just kind of hitting a bunch of planets, but the moon will go into Capricorn. Again, that is its sign of detriment, so it's not the best day to like feel all of the emotions, but the moon in Capricorn, it reminds me, like coming from this new moon in Scorpio into the moon in Capricorn reminds me of like some sort of veteran that like had a really fucked up experience in war, and then when they come back, they just don't ever talk about it. Just like, nope. Detach. That never happened. That's how I look at the moon in Capricorn. Like there are healthy times to detach from emotions. There are times where it's like, hey, when you are upset, when you are angry, when you are emotional, get something done. Like if you're just going to sit there and toil in your emotions or like, cry yourself to sleep or whatever, that's not always going to like play into your benefit. Like there are times and spaces for that. I feel like the moon in Scorpio is more of a better time to like cry until you're so tired you go to bed at like 3 p.m. But the moon in Capricorn is more like, be busy. Just get yourself involved in something that takes away forces your attention on something, that forces your focus. The moon will go into Capricorn. It's going to make a sextile to Saturn. This is like, again, Saturn in Pisces. It is now direct. We know exactly what responsibilities and duties that we have and that we need to take on. And we feel a lot more comfortable in those, right? And so the moon making that sextile to Saturn is like, okay, grow up a little bit. Let me suck it in and just do what I got to do. But then the moon trines Jupiter. There's hope. There's faith in that. There's fun in that. There's excitement of like, cool, I'm glad that I took this time out to do X, Y, and Z because now I'm, again, getting closer and closer towards reaching my goals, that moon trine Jupiter. And then the moon squares Venus, which like what I love about Thursday is the moon will separate from Jupiter and apply to Venus. So it's, what's the term? Enclosed by benefics. Is that the right term? I feel like that's the right term, but I also feel like that isn't the right term. But the moon's going to be in between benefics by Thursday evening. And as the moon makes that square to Venus, there's like, it's really not that bad. I just look at the moon squaring Venus as like, with Venus in Libra still needs to be coursed or caressed, like wine, like Venus in Libra needs to be wine and dined. And the moon in Capricorn is like, no, we're just going to do this. And Venus in Libra is like, no, I need to be wined and dined. And so I think as the moon like squares, Venus and Libra, there's a level of like, not necessarily like, you still got to do the moon and Capricorn thing, but just having the awareness of like, the serious business, detached way of doing things worked for me earlier in the day, but not at this moment. I need to be a little bit more aware and sensitive to how this is like addressed. Like you can't just like, again, when you buy a product, and it just comes in a regular boring brown box, like that sparks one emotion versus like when the box and the packaging is really nice, you're like, you just feel better about your purchase. That's how I look at the moon squaring Venus, is like maybe rather than just a boring brown box to serve it up in, you need to have maybe a little bit of, style when it comes to what box you're serving it up in on Thursday. And again, that's just more of like relating to people, connecting more with people, and whatever you're doing, like there needs to be more style put into it. But also on Thursday, Mars will trine Neptune. I love Mars trine Neptune, specifically because, like, again, I've been talking about this for the past few weeks, but Mars and Scorpio, or all the Scorpio stuff in like trining Neptune and Pisces is very like, yeah, like it reminds me of being like an angsty kid. And like, I remember when I was a kid, I always had dreams of like wanting to run away. Maybe it's because I'm a Sagittarius rising, but I always just like, yeah, I'm going to run away and I'm going to be free and my parents are going to miss me. And yeah, that's how I think of Scorpio, like Mars and Scorpio trining Neptune. It's kind of like you get like this vision of like, yeah, I'm going to do something and it's going to feel so good. And because I'm so angry right now, and it's just going to be so much better when I'm on the other side of it. Like that's Mars and Scorpio trine Neptune. Now that's a very immature like analogy, but I look at Mars trine Neptune as like, you can use that pain as motivation. Like it's just energy. I don't care if it's, ecstasy type feeling or pain and resentment. It's all energy. And it just depends on how you're using that energy. If you're using that resentment energy to beat yourself up, to beat other people up, to do harm, well, that's not going to do any good. But if you're using that pain and that resentment and you're transmuting that energy, I love this hand motion for transmuting. Reminds me of I don't know, like an energy ball. But if you're transmuting that into what can I use this energy for? Making pain as a fuel, making pain and resentment and anger and like as a fuel source to motivate yourself to do something else, to get yourself out of that situation, to get someone else out of that situation, to help someone. Mars trine Neptune is like, what is the vision? What is the plan? It's like, I'm so angry. I'm so pissed that I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and I'm going to show them. That's what I think about it. My only concern is, again, it's Neptune. Like, let's be a little realistic where, again, when you're a kid and you just like fantasize about running away, it's like, you're fucking not going to run away. And it's also not going to be that good. You'll probably get kidnapped and trafficked. So let's not do that. But Mars, so it's like one of those things of like, be realistic, but you can have a safe space for like, again, a fantasy or a dream and allow that to motivate yourself while also still having like a realistic idea of how it's going to go. So you don't have these high expectations that let you down in the future. Then Friday, the moon, while it's in Capricorn, makes a trine to Uranus. That's really the only lunar transit. So there is some like, innovation and some kind of like, oh, I, do this and that. And all of a sudden this happens. Like there's some sort of innovation in being able to go with the flow. But we get the Mars Cazimi. Mars Cazimi goes from Friday to Saturday. Friday is the time to restart. What I love about like a planet going Cazimi again is that like in the ancient astrology stuff, it's like this planet is dying. And when it hits the Cazimi point, it's dead. Or you could look at it as this planet is dying and then boom, Cazimi, it becomes reborn again. And again, look at what Scorpio just rules in your chart. And how can you tap into like, for me, it rules like my 5th and my 12th house. So like I'm, and it's in my 12th house. So I'm going through it in one way, but in another way, I'm in an inescapable situation in which the problems that I've been avoiding can no longer be avoided. Think of it as like prison. I mean, Mars and Scorpio, like the 12th house rules prisons. And so like everything's like in my 12th house. So it just like feels that way. But the Mars Cazimi is kind of like, okay, something needs to be recharged here. Something needs to restart. Something needs to have a purification process. Something needs to formally die and something needs to formally begin. And this is Mars Cazimi in Scorpio. This isn't like a Mars Cazimi in its detriment sign of like, Taurus or Libra. This is Scorpio. This is Mars's home territory. The way I look at this is like a Cazimi in its own sign is that planet having access to all of its tools and resources that it needs to do its job well. And it's not a Mars Cazimi in a foreign sign to it, so it doesn't even have the resources, and it has to have the start over, but it doesn't have anything. It has everything that it needs, and it could start over again. Like, how would you feel if you could have a fresh restart and you had access to all of the tools and the resources that you need? You'd feel probably fucking pretty good. You'd be like, hell yeah, I could take this on. That's Friday. That continues into Saturday. But Friday, this is what, you know what, again, I've said this before, but time and time again, this becomes my favorite thing about astrology is just honoring the time, honoring the weather. For example, if you plant a garden in January, anything north of like the Arizona, like northern border, or let's just say in Colorado, you're not going to get anything out of planting that. Everything's dead. The ground is frozen. It's not going to work. You have to honor that time. What is January or the winter good for? That's a whole, I could go off on that tangent all day long. But what I love about astrology is you're just honoring the time. And the time right now says there needs to be a very like big restart, but the restart isn't in, it's not a Jupiter Kazemi where it's about our beliefs and our faith and our hope. It's not a Saturn Kazemi where it's about our disciplines and our virtues. It's not a Venus Kazemi where we're restarting a new, passion project or something that is pleasurable. It's a Mars Kazemi. It's like, what are we fighting for? What do we need to cut out? What do we need to be ambitious for? And where do we really need to actually point our energy towards? And so then we get to Saturday, and on Saturday, the moon will then ingress into Aquarius, and it'll be squaring Jupiter pretty much all day. The moon's in Aquarius. There's kind of like this, it's not as detached as the moon in Capricorn is emotionally. The moon in Aquarius is detached in the same way that like when people speak on behalf of a greater community are detached. It's like you can't speak to, it's like a logical detachment from a situation. And that can help you give yourself a third person perspective or a bird's eye view on a situation. But like you can only speak for yourself. You can't always speak for whatever group of people that you like. I don't speak for all astrologers. I really don't. Oh, by the way, ask a fucking astrologer ask 10 astrologers the same questions. You're going to get 10 different answers. But that's going to be true for like 99% of anything and everybody. But this is why I love astrology, because it recognizes us all as very unique and specific individuals. Cool, right? But the moon will go into Aquarius and make a square to Jupiter. And there's this kind of like, again, more of an emotional connection to your group, to your tribe, to your crowd, but also to new ways of thinking about it, new ways and new ideas of how we, navigate that. But the moon's going to be squaring Jupiter, where it's like the moon in Aquarius squaring Jupiter reminds me of, I just watched a video on one of my favorite YouTube channels. Is called Historia Civilius. For my real Roman Empire history nerds, for the guys out there that really know that Roman shit, Historia Civilius. It's like the best Roman channel ever. But he made this video about time and like how the clock began and time measurement. And he kind of like had a really like leftist, like almost borderline communist take on it. But he kept quoting this book from this Canadian socialist that I really want to buy because, man, he had some really interesting ideas about time. But what I'm getting to is in the winter times for like the serfs and the peasants, like they didn't work a lot because there wasn't a lot of daylight and it was cold and they couldn't really, like the rulers over them couldn't do much about it. And that's how I kind of look at the moon in Aquarius squaring Jupiter is like, if it's winter time and you're trying to get a big group of people together to like help you do this thing, like they may not want to do it. And the moon in Aquarius squaring Jupiter and Taurus is like, you may be a little bit more on your own and trying to outsource all of the help at this moment. Again, that's not to say that's true all of the time, but at this moment, it's like, hey, maybe you want to be, it's like, if you're like wanted to like do a group project or, maybe if you work from home by yourself like me, it's like, oh, I want to do this with this people and these people. And it's just hard to like get everybody together. That's kind of like the moon in Aquarius squaring Jupiter and Taurus. And how that is like, you want to get everybody together, but it's squaring Jupiter, where it's like, that's probably going to take a lot longer and it may not work. Like maybe it's because you want to get things done faster. I don't think that's going to be the way to do things faster. So like Saturday, you kind of have to like, I think Saturday is a good day to connect with people, but I think if you're going to be connecting with people, it is going to slow things more down and you're not going to be as consistent as you want to be. But the Mars Kazemi continues. Like Friday and Saturday are all about that reset and that recharge with, again, what are we spending our time doing? What do we have energy for? Do you even have energy? Are you tired and lazy as shit? How do we fix that? How do we change your energy? How do we change your drive? What do you need to do? And then we get to Sunday, and on Sunday, the moon will make a trine to Venus, and then it will sextile Mercury and square Uranus. So on Sundays, the moon trines Venus. I really like that for connecting with people. I feel like Saturday is not the day for being super connected with people, especially if like maybe you have other things to do. But the moon on Sunday in Aquarius trining Venus is like, have you ever like been in a new crowd or a new group, and while you're in that new crowd or that new group, let's say you go to some like meetup, maybe you go to some weird YouTuber's astrology picnic in Denver, and in that big group or crowd, like you don't know that many people, but you just talk to one person and you end up chit-chatting with them all day long, and you end up making a friendship out of it. Like that's how I look at the moon in Aquarius trining Venus and Libra, is like there's a group dynamic involved here, but the fun part of it is like making a really solid one-on-one connection. So I love that for Sunday. And then it sextiles Mercury and Sag, where it's like, you know how it is nowadays with like the social and political climate, where you kind of like test the waters of like what you can say, and then they're also like on board. That's how I look at the moon sextile Mercury, is kind of like, oh, insert X, Y, and Z somewhat edgy, controversial statement, and then they match you with something even more edgy and controversial, like, oh, you're fun, so we can like chit chat about it. That's how I look at it. But then the moon in Aquarius squares Uranus and Taurus, and again, every time the moon in Aquarius squares Uranus and Taurus, all I think about is the Hot Rod movie, where they're all banding together, singing along, walking down the street, and then just some guy with a trash can throws a window, and then a big riot breaks out. It's like there's instability, there's some sort of random event that kind of shakes things up, and it doesn't always have to be like a riot, but it is kind of like, for example, at the picnic that I did in September, it rained heavily. Like it was looking like it was going to rain. So I told him, I was like, let's start, packing up and meet up over at Punch Bowl Social. And then, I mean, like it downpoured. Like I haven't been stuck in the rain like that since I was like a kid. Like it was just so like there was nowhere to go. Like we all had like one easy up. So shout out to Jessica and Jordan for bringing an easy up, but we all huddled under the easy up and we still all got soaking wet. But that's Sunday. And that's this week. We get to next week. Check out how much we got going on next week. We have Mars sextiling Pluto. I like it, but it's also not the biggest deal. The sun ingresses into Sagittarius and then squares Saturn. So at least we're not in intense Scorpio season. We're in goofy, silly clown world of Sag season. Mars goes into Sagittarius and squares Saturn as well. So like that's a lot of going nowhere fast. Mercury ingresses into shadow, and I will have a Mercury retrograde video out for you guys around the time right before Mercury does station. But Mercury will go into shadow. We will be having a Mercury retrograde over December. Mercury will square Neptune. Boy, if you thought you were confused before, Mercury in Sagittarius squaring Neptune and Pisces will be even more confusing. And we have the full moon in Gemini. I love the full moon in Gemini because it's going to be the full moon in Gemini will have Mercury, the ruler of the moon, squaring Neptune, where it's just kind of like, it reminds me of that Office meme where everyone's kind of pointing the finger guns and no one knows what's going on. But that's what I got for you guys this week. Let me know what your thoughts and opinions are in the comments below. I love and appreciate every single one of you, and I'll be seeing you next week.